Have you ever noticed that some people seem to attract wealth while others spend their entire lives chasing it? It's tempting to believe the difference is luck, or talent, or opportunity. But what if the real difference is something far more unsettling? What if the average person and the millionaire are living in the same world, yet playing entirely different games? Because before wealth appears in a bank account, it appears in a mindset. Before someone builds a fortune, they build a way of thinking that most people never develop. And the uncomfortable truth is this: many people don't fail because they lack money. They fail because they never become the person capable of creating it. Today, we'll explore 3 powerful mindset shifts rooted in Machiavellian and Stoic wisdom. Mental transformations that separate those who endlessly chase wealth from those who quietly build it. And the third shift may force you to question everything you've been taught about success. Mindset shift number 1: stop trading time. Start acquiring leverage. One of the most expensive beliefs ever sold to ordinary people is the idea that working harder is the answer to everything. From childhood, we are taught a simple equation: work more, earn more, struggle longer, eventually succeed. It sounds noble, it sounds fair, it sounds logical, and that is precisely why so many people never question it. But there is a hidden flaw buried inside this philosophy. Time is finite. No matter how ambitious you are, your day contains the same 24 hours as everyone else. You cannot negotiate for more. You cannot manufacture additional years. You cannot outwork the limitations of time forever. Yet millions of people spend their lives trying. They wake up earlier, stay later, take extra shifts, accept more responsibilities, and for a while, their income rises. But eventually they encounter an invisible ceiling, a point where more effort produces smaller and smaller rewards. A point where they discover a truth that few are prepared to hear. Hard work alone does not create wealth. Leverage does. This is where the psychology of millionaires begins to diverge from the psychology of everyone else. The average person focuses on effort. The wealthy focus on multiplication. The average person asks, "How can I make more money?" The wealthy ask, "How can this create money without requiring more of my time?" Notice the difference. One approach depends entirely on personal labor. The other seeks independence from it. This is not laziness. It is strategy. The ancient Stoics understood that wisdom comes from directing energy where it produces the greatest effect. The Machiavellians understood something even darker. Power rarely belongs to the person doing the work. Power belongs to the person controlling the structure through which the work flows. The laborer participates in the machine. The strategist owns the machine. And history repeatedly rewards the second position. Consider the business owner. A single hour spent designing a system may continue generating value for years. Consider an investor. Capital begins working while the owner sleeps. Consider a creator. One piece of content can reach thousands, sometimes millions, long after it was created. Consider intellectual property. An idea conceived once can be purchased repeatedly. Notice what is happening. The wealthy are not merely working. They are building assets. Assets that continue producing value after the initial effort has ended. This is leverage. And leverage changes everything. Because the moment value becomes detached from your physical presence, you begin escaping the oldest trap in the world. The trap of trading life for income. Most people never escape it. Not because they lack intelligence. Not because they lack discipline. But because they become addicted to effort itself. Society praises visible struggle. The exhausted worker receives admiration. The busy employee receives respect. The person sacrificing every waking hour is celebrated as dedicated. Yet nobody asks the most important question. Will this effort continue paying you when you stop? If the answer is no, then the effort may be creating income, but not freedom. And freedom is what wealth is truly about. This is the dark truth hidden beneath the culture of hard work. Effort can become a prison, a comfortable prison, a respected prison, a prison that rewards you just enough to keep you inside. Year after year, decade after decade, until one day you realize you have spent your entire life running on a treadmill that never moved. The wealthy eventually recognize something that most people never do. Every hour worked should create value beyond that hour. Every action should move toward multiplication. Every skill should be transformed into an asset. Every asset should become a system. And every system should reduce dependence on personal labor. Because the ultimate goal is not simply earning more. It is creating mechanisms that continue producing value without requiring your constant presence. That is where real power begins. The worker is paid once. The owner is paid repeatedly. And the moment you understand this distinction, you begin seeing the world differently. You stop asking how much something costs. You start asking whether it can multiply. You stop chasing hours. You start acquiring leverage. But leverage alone is not enough. Because leverage only becomes powerful when you stop behaving like the people trapped inside the system. And that requires the second mindset shift. Because leverage only works if you stop thinking like a consumer. Mindset shift number 2: see everything as an asset or a liability. Most people believe wealth is a money problem. Millionaires understand that wealth is an allocation problem. The difference may sound small, but it changes the way a person sees the entire world. The average mind evaluates life through a simple lens. Do I want this? Will this make me feel good? Can I afford it? The wealthy ask a different question. Will this move me forward or hold me back? Because at a certain level of awareness, everything becomes an investment. Everything, not just money, time, energy, attention, relationships, habits, conversations, daily routines, even the thoughts you repeatedly entertain. Every one of them is either adding value to your future or quietly subtracting from it. This is the hidden cost most people never calculate. They think only in terms of financial expense. But life charges interest in many forms. A toxic relationship costs focus. A destructive habit costs momentum. A distracting environment costs opportunity. Years spent pursuing meaningless validation cost potential. And unlike money, these resources can never be recovered. This is the hidden cost most people never calculate. They think only in terms of financial expense. But life charges interest in many forms. A toxic relationship costs focus. A destructive habit costs momentum. A distracting environment costs opportunity. Years spent pursuing meaningless validation cost potential. And unlike money, these resources can never be recovered. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology existed. They believed attention was one of the most valuable resources a human being possesses. Because what repeatedly occupies the mind eventually shapes the person. What you give attention to eventually owns a piece of your life. Think about that carefully. Every notification, every distraction, every unnecessary conflict, every hour spent consuming instead of creating. Each one appears insignificant in isolation. But together, they quietly determine the direction of your future. The frightening part is that most people never notice it happening. Because the greatest liabilities rarely arrive disguised as threats. They arrive disguised as comfort, entertainment, convenience, pleasure, escape. The things that feel harmless today often become the chains that limit tomorrow. And this is where the Machiavellian perspective becomes uncomfortable. Most people are distracted because distraction is easier than discipline. The mind naturally seeks comfort. It seeks stimulation. It seeks relief from uncertainty and effort. Distraction offers all three. It asks nothing. It demands nothing. It rewards instantly. Discipline, on the other hand, delays gratification. It requires sacrifice. It requires patience. It requires enduring temporary discomfort for future gain. And that is why so few people choose it consistently. Now imagine two individuals beginning from similar circumstances. Similar intelligence. Similar opportunities. Similar backgrounds. At first, their lives appear almost identical. The first spends his evenings consuming, watching, scrolling, reacting, escaping. The second spends those same hours differently, learning skills, building assets, developing expertise, creating opportunities. The difference is barely visible. A month passes, nothing changes. A year passes, still little difference. 5 years pass, the gap begins to emerge. 10 years pass, the gap becomes impossible to ignore. One person wonders why life feels stagnant. The other appears to have gained momentum in every direction. More income, more options, more influence, more freedom. To outsiders, it looks sudden. It looks like luck. It looks like overnight success. But the reality, the outcome was being decided long before anyone could see it. In thousands of small choices, in invisible habits, in seemingly insignificant decisions repeated every day. Because every choice is casting a vote for your future. Every action strengthens a particular version of yourself. The question is never whether your choices matter. The question is what they are quietly building. This is how millionaires evaluate the world. Not emotionally, not impulsively, strategically. They understand that every commitment carries a cost. Every distraction carries a price. Every opportunity ignored creates an invisible consequence. And because they understand this, they become ruthless with their attention. Not because they lack enjoyment, not because they reject pleasure, but because they understand that the future belongs to those who consciously direct their resources rather than unconsciously spending them. The average person asks, "What do I feel like doing today?" The strategic thinker asks, "What is this decision creating tomorrow?" And over time, that single difference compounds into entirely different lives. Because wealth is rarely built through one extraordinary decision. It is built through thousands of ordinary decisions made with extraordinary awareness. And that awareness leads directly to the final mindset shift. A realization so uncomfortable that most people spend their entire lives avoiding it. Because the final mindset shift may be the most uncomfortable of all. Mindset shift number 3: stop seeking approval. Start seeking position. There is a silent force controlling the lives of millions of people. It is not poverty. It is not lack of intelligence. It is not lack of opportunity. It is the fear of being judged. Most people will never admit it. But countless decisions are shaped by a simple question hiding beneath the surface of their minds. What will other people think? It influences careers, relationships, dreams, ambitions, even identities. People abandon opportunities not because they are impossible, but because they are unpopular. They silence ideas not because the ideas are foolish, but because the ideas might invite criticism. They remain trapped in familiar lives because familiar lives earn social acceptance. And acceptance feels safe. This is one of the greatest psychological prisons ever created. Because the bars are invisible, no one forces you to stay inside. You stay because leaving might attract attention. The Stoics recognized this danger centuries ago. They understood that a person who depends on external approval can never truly be free. The wealthy eventually learn something different. They stop optimizing for approval. They start optimizing for position. Position is where opportunities flow. Position is where influence accumulates. Position is where leverage grows. And position often requires doing things that the crowd initially misunderstands. This is where the Machiavellian perspective becomes uncomfortable. The crowd rewards familiarity. The market rewards value. The crowd rewards agreement. The market rewards solutions. The crowd rewards fitting in. The market rewards standing out. These are not the same game. And many people spend their entire lives succeeding at one while failing at the other. Think about how often social pressure shapes behavior. Someone wants to start a business, but friends call it unrealistic, so they abandon it. Someone wants to learn a valuable skill, but nobody in their circle understands why, so they stop. Someone sees an opportunity, but pursuing it means looking different from everyone else, so they choose comfort instead. The tragedy is not the criticism. The tragedy is the surrender. Potential quietly exchanged for approval. Opportunity traded for acceptance. Freedom sacrificed for belonging. And because these decisions happen gradually, most people never realize what they are giving away. Years later, they wonder why their lives look exactly like everyone else's. The answer is simple. They followed the same map. Independent thinking is uncomfortable because it requires standing alone before others understand your direction, before the results appear, before the rewards arrive. Most people cannot tolerate this stage. They need reassurance, validation, permission, evidence that the crowd approves. But wealth builders understand something crucial. The crowd rarely approves of innovation in the beginning. The crowd often mocks what it later admires. History is filled with examples of individuals who were doubted before they were respected, ignored before they were noticed, questioned before they were celebrated, not because they possessed supernatural abilities, but because they were willing to endure temporary social discomfort in pursuit of long-term positioning. This is why psychological freedom is so valuable. It allows you to act according to reality instead of popularity, to pursue opportunity instead of approval, to build according to vision rather than consensus. And this leads to one of the darkest truths about human nature. Many people never fail because of a lack of talent. They fail because they require permission. Permission from friends, permission from family, permission from society, permission from strangers who have never built anything themselves. And while they wait for approval, opportunity quietly moves on. The future belongs to those willing to act before consensus forms, to think before the crowd thinks, to move before the crowd moves, to see before the crowd sees. Because the moment you stop needing applause is often the moment you become dangerous. Dangerous not to others, dangerous to limitations, dangerous to expectations, dangerous to the invisible psychological chains that keep most people living smaller lives than they are capable of living. When you no longer require validation, you become difficult to control. When you no longer fear judgment, you become difficult to stop. When you no longer seek approval, you begin positioning yourself for opportunities others are too afraid to pursue. And once these three mindset shifts combine, something remarkable begins to happen. A different version of you starts to emerge. A version that sees the world through a completely different lens. A version that no longer trades time blindly, no longer wastes resources unconsciously, no longer surrenders potential for approval. A version capable of building what most people only dream about. The millionaire identity at this point. It may be tempting to believe these three mindset shifts are simply strategies, techniques, mental tricks, ways to improve financial outcomes. But that would be missing the deeper lesson. Because wealth is rarely the result of a single action. It is the result of becoming a different person. The uncomfortable truth is that most people want millionaire results without undergoing millionaire transformation. They want the rewards, without changing the operating system that produces those rewards. But reality does not work that way. A person cannot consistently create outcomes that contradict their deepest beliefs. Eventually, identity always wins. This is why some people repeatedly earn money and lose it. Why others receive opportunities and waste them. Why sudden success often disappears as quickly as it arrives. Because money alone does not create a wealthy person. Money merely reveals the person who was already there. The Stoics understood that external conditions rarely determine character. Character determines how external conditions are handled. The Machiavellians understood something equally important. Power does not begin with resources. Power begins with perception, the ability to see reality differently than the crowd. And that is exactly what these three mindset shifts create. The first mindset shift creates leverage. You stop viewing time as something to sell. You begin viewing systems as something to build. You stop asking how hard you can work. You start asking how intelligently value can multiply. The second mindset shift creates discipline. You stop seeing life as a collection of random choices. You begin recognizing that every action carries a hidden cost. Every habit becomes an investment. Every distraction becomes a liability. Every decision becomes a vote for the person you are becoming. The third mindset shift creates independence. You stop seeking permission. You stop negotiating your ambitions with the opinions of others. You stop asking for approval and start positioning yourself where opportunity can find you. Alone, each shift is powerful. Together, they become something much greater. A new way of thinking. A new lens through which reality is interpreted. A new operating system. And this is where many people misunderstand wealth. They imagine that money creates confidence. In truth, confidence often comes first. They imagine that success creates discipline. In reality, discipline usually creates success. They imagine that wealth creates freedom. But psychological freedom often appears long before financial freedom ever arrives. The internal transformation always precedes the external one. The seed comes before the harvest. The foundation comes before the structure. The identity comes before the outcome. This is why two people can possess the same opportunity and produce completely different results. One sees possibility. The other sees risk. One sees a long-term investment. The other sees a short-term sacrifice. One sees a path. The other sees an obstacle. The difference is not the opportunity itself. The difference is the person evaluating it. And perhaps that is the greatest hidden truth about wealth. Money often amplifies what already exists. If a person is impulsive, money amplifies impulsiveness. If a person lacks discipline, money magnifies the consequences. If a person lacks direction, money rarely provides it. But if a person has developed leverage, discipline, and independence, money becomes fuel. Fuel for an identity that was already moving in the right direction. This is why true wealth creation begins long before the first dollar appears. It begins in private, in thoughts nobody hears, in habits nobody notices, in decisions nobody applauds. Because the strongest transformations are often invisible at first. Consider the oak tree. When a storm finally arrives, people admire its strength. They marvel at its ability to withstand powerful winds. What they fail to see are the years spent growing roots beneath the surface. Years of unseen preparation. Years of invisible development. Years of strengthening before the challenge ever appeared. An oak tree does not become strong during the storm. It becomes strong long before the storm arrives. And wealth works the same way. The fortune may be visible. The mindset that created it usually is not. The success may appear sudden. The transformation behind it rarely is. Because long before wealth enters a person's life, a different identity emerges. An identity built on leverage instead of labor alone. Discipline instead of distraction. Independence instead of approval. And once that identity takes root, the results that follow are often only a matter of time. Why most people never make these shifts by now? The answer may seem obvious. If these mindset shifts are so powerful, why doesn't everyone adopt them? Why do so many people remain trapped in cycles they claim they want to escape? Why do so many continue trading time, consuming instead of building, and seeking approval from people who cannot create the future they desire? The answer is far less practical than most people imagine. The real battle is psychological. Always has been. Because changing your life is often easier than changing your identity. Most people are not fighting against a lack of opportunity. They are fighting against themselves. Against deeply rooted beliefs. Against emotional habits. Against stories they have repeated for so long that they mistake them for reality. This is why transformation feels uncomfortable. Not because it is impossible, but because it demands something most people are unwilling to surrender. The familiar version of themselves. The first mindset shift requires patience. And patience is difficult in a world addicted to immediacy. People want results before growth, rewards before effort, outcomes before preparation. But leverage demands a longer horizon. It asks you to plant seeds today for harvest you may not see tomorrow. Most people lose interest long before the rewards arrive. The second mindset shift requires responsibility. And responsibility is heavy. It is easier to blame circumstances, easier to blame luck, easier to blame the economy, other people, or the unfairness of life. Because responsibility removes excuses. It forces you to acknowledge that every choice matters. Every habit matters. Every distraction matters. And that realization can be uncomfortable. The third mindset shift requires sacrifice. The willingness to stand apart from the crowd, to endure misunderstanding, to move forward without constant reassurance, to pursue opportunities that others may not understand until years later. Most people underestimate how difficult this truly is. Human beings are wired for belonging. We seek acceptance, approval, validation. The fear of rejection is ancient, and yet every meaningful transformation requires confronting it. This is why so many people stop before they begin, not because they cannot succeed, but because success asks them to become someone unfamiliar, someone who thinks differently, acts differently, chooses differently, and that version of themselves feels threatening to the identity they have spent years protecting. This leads to one of the darkest truths about human nature. Many people would rather protect their current identity than build a better future. They would rather defend old beliefs than question them, rather preserve comfort than pursue growth, rather remain predictable than risk becoming extraordinary. Because every transformation begins with a loss. The loss of certainty, the loss of old habits, the loss of familiar excuses, the loss of the stories that once made an action feel acceptable. And while the rewards of growth are real, the process of growth is rarely comfortable. That is why so few people embrace it fully. The opportunity exists. The information exists. The path exists. In many ways, access has never been greater. Knowledge is available. Skills can be learned. Opportunities can be created. The doors are not as locked as most people believe. Yet the majority will never walk through them. Not because the doors are closed, but because stepping through requires becoming someone different. Someone willing to think independently. Someone willing to delay gratification. Someone willing to take responsibility. Someone willing to act without applause. And that is where the true divide appears. Not between rich and poor. Not between talented and untalented. But between those who cling to familiar limitations and those willing to challenge them. The opportunity is available to almost everyone. but very few are willing to think differently enough to seize it. And perhaps that is the ultimate lesson hidden beneath everything you've heard today. The greatest obstacle standing between most people and the future they desire is not the world around them. It is the identity they refuse to leave behind. Because the moment a person changes the way they see themselves, they begin changing the way they see everything else. And when that happens, a different future becomes possible. To stay within the writing block limit, here's the final closing section in normal text format. The final lesson as we reach the end of this discussion: one truth should stand above all others. Most people spend their lives chasing money. They search for the next opportunity, the next strategy, the next secret, the next shortcut. They believe wealth is something that exists somewhere outside themselves, waiting to be discovered. But those who eventually build extraordinary wealth often arrive at a different conclusion. The real goal was never money. The real goal was becoming the person capable of creating it. Because money is only a result, a consequence, an effect, and every effect has a cause. The visible result may be a successful business, a growing investment portfolio, financial freedom, influence, opportunity, but those are merely the branches. The roots remain hidden beneath the surface. Leverage, discipline, independence, patience, responsibility, long-term thinking, the ability to act without approval, the ability to see opportunity where others see obstacles, the ability to build while others consume. These are the invisible forces that shape visible outcomes. This is why two people can be given the same resources and create entirely different futures. Because resources matter, but mindset determines what is done with those resources. The world often celebrates the wealth, but rarely notices the identity that created it. It sees the harvest, not the years spent planting. It sees the victory, not the countless internal battles that came before it. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden beneath everything we've explored today. Wealth is not simply accumulated, but mindset determines what is done with those resources. The world often celebrates the wealth, but rarely notices the identity that created it. It sees the harvest, not the years spent planting. It sees the victory, not the countless internal battles that came before it. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden beneath everything we've explored today. Wealth is not simply accumulated. It is developed from the inside out. First through perception, then through action, then through identity, and finally, through results. The person comes first. The wealth follows later. So as you leave this video, ask yourself a simple question: are you still chasing money? Or are you building the mindset capable of creating it? Because the answer to that question may determine far more than your finances. It may determine the future version of yourself. And in the end, that is the true game most people never realize they are playing. Final cinematic line. The crowd searches for shortcuts to wealth. The millionaire searches for a mind that no longer needs them.